Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Barbara Velasquez. I am the coordinator of International Intercultural Education at Metropolitan Community College. Thank you for joining us today to open the college's celebration of Native Heritage Month. Consider checking out mccneb.edu/native to explore the rest of programming through mid-November. The National Native American Heritage Month celebrates and recognizes the accomplishments of the peoples who were the original inhabitants, explorers, and settlers of the United States. During the celebration at MCC, we endeavor to celebrate rich histories, diverse cultures, and important contributions of first people. Your microphones will be silenced during the presentation. After her oral presentation, questions will be addressed by our speaker. You may send questions at any time through the chat, which will come only to the hosts. So there's no chat function among audience members, but you can send questions at any time that we will bring back to the end of the session for our discussion period. Your continued attendance at International Intercultural Education Programming could qualify you for prizes throughout the year. Considered, complete the online evaluation and include your name and contact information. My address will be on a slide at the end of the program. It is mccneb.edu/IIEEVAL. Wynema Morris is a full-blood Omaha and member of the Omaha tribe of Nebraska. She is currently teaching as adjunct professor for the Nebraska Indian Community College in the Native American Studies Department. Her areas of expertise include Native American history, culture, tradition and history, federal Indian law, tribal constitutional law, and nation building, American Indian spirituality, to name a few. She also works with the tribal archives preserved and managed by the Nebraska Indian Community College. In addition to being an associate fellow for the Center for the Study of the Great Plains, she is also serving as cultural curatorial consultant with the Berlin Museum in Berlin, Germany. She is also involved in collaborating with the Joslin Art Museum and Creighton University in seeking a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to digitize the Bodmer Maximilian watercolors and history from 1833 to 1834. She lives in Wald Hill, Nebraska on the Omaha Indian Reservation. She is a proud grandmother of 2 grandsons who live in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. She has an MA from Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, Arizona. Please welcome Ms. Wynema Morris, who will present Exploring a Native American Holistic View of Water.
Well, thank you, Barbara, and welcome to all of those who have chosen to join this morning. And welcome, in a sense, to NICC and to my reservation. The Omaha tribe is one of the few tribal nations that has not been removed from their traditional homelands. So yeah, I think you all, if you know anything, I mean, I shouldn't say if you know anything, but history often says or explores the fact and talks about the removal of a lot of nations, hence the creation of what we called Indian country, which primarily then became Oklahoma. So this tribe was one of the few to escape that particular fate. So when I'm on my reservation and as I live here, and sometimes when I have the opportunity to explore, not explore, but walk, you know, in certain areas, it really gives me a strong sense of connection. And it's interesting how where I walk, I'm always following these little streams. And the reason for that, of course, is a very practical perspective on tribal history, in that once this reservation was created in 1854, we then were here in this area, which is far northeastern part of Nebraska. Again, it was our traditional homelands. We tended to establish we had 3 separate villages, but there were also scattered home sites, but every single one of them tended to settle or to be near a stream of fresh water. So again, on the practical side, people need fresh water. You need it to drink, you need it for cooking, and of course you need it to clean your clothes, and you need it for, just your own hygiene purposes. So water then is essential to life. And I wanted to talk a little bit about not just the fact that it is necessary, but American Indians have a totally different worldview from the Western European. The Western European has a very set way, and of course, that particular way influences the way the whole world tends to operate. American Indians, by and large, are almost totally opposite of that view. And I often tell my students, wherever you look at how you operate right now, because we all do, this is the world we live in, the Western world, think the opposite, and you will find an American Indian staring back at you. And so this is how we open that course. But the whole idea that American Indians would even have a different worldview, that number one, makes sense. And overall, it's totally spiritual in its aspect. But also it doesn't coincide, but it reflects at least what I have gleaned from studying and talking with other tribal intellectuals from other tribal colleges and just within tribes, is that there are 4 principles of life in this worldview. So I'm going to draw something back here, and I debated with myself if I should put it on the board behind myself, or whether or not I should, draw in front of you. Well, I ran out of time. I did, not Metro. Okay, it was me. So I thought, well, okay, so you're just going to have to bear with me. But the 4 principles of life are relatedness, connectedness, interdependency, and reciprocity. So everything in terms of the worldview, and I even see it happening in the Western worldview, that everything is connected. You, particularly the women, believe it or not, you're connected to the moon. Yeah, every 28 days, okay, you know what happens. That's connectedness. Not only that, but there's so many other ways in which you can look at connectedness. I mean, we're literally connected to this planet. When the astronauts go off this planet and they're gone for a number of months, possibly a year, their muscles atrophy. They have to make sure that they're exercising. I mean, they have to do things like as if they were on Earth, and they create a false gravity or a temporary gravity just to simulate how their bodies should function as though they were on Earth. That's connectedness. So relatedness, we're all related. I think Standing Bear gave an exceptionally, not only was his own argument standing before Judge Dundee, but he said, if you cut me, I will bleed red, and so will you. And so, as human beings, we all have the same color of blood. Doesn't matter what the outside looks like, the blood is going to be red. That's relatedness. And not only that, but as living creatures, we all have some form of fluid reverberating through our bodies. So if you're cold-blooded, you're going to have some other kind of probably blood as well. It just won't be warm until they take measures to do so, known as reptiles. But human beings, our blood is already warm. So you see all of these ways in which we are related. We are not separate from anything. And this is the worldview of American Indians, is connectedness, this relatedness. Interdependency, of course, is a very, very key principle in the recognition of our world and us as a human being, in that we are so dependent upon the plant life, we're so dependent upon the animal life, but you take nothing from those resources without giving something back. And so, you could argue that, well, okay, so you plant corn and you got to put back in the nutrients. Well, of course, but if you do it with chemicals, then, the question that has to arise, is that good and healthy? So, but I don't want to go there. I just want to set the stage here to understand what these 4 principles of life are, because they're very much at work in terms of our view of water as water is sacred. So let me show you just very quickly, though, sort of a very concrete way that American Indians see their world. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody walks through and says, oh, I'm operating in the Indian world, and so this is how I operate. It's just part of that whole worldview, pretty much the same way that you have your worldview. I mean, not you, but all of us in terms of the Western view. So essentially, everything is circular, but man is just a part of everything else. Stars, planets, moon, sun, earth, plants, did I say? The animal world, which, by the way, also includes germs. You may not, because yes, we do have science, okay? And so man here is just part of the whole tapestry of creation. So in this explanation, this is when you can tend to get a little on the spiritual side. At least this is what I was told, but to me it's just how we live our world. Because I talked about this in another class once, and it was a room full of, there wasn't hardly any American Indians in there, so they couldn't relate. I said, well, that's, no, that's, in any event. So, I can name a bunch of other things, but all of these, and in terms of the principles of life, the first one is connectedness. Connectedness. And then you have relatedness. They sound similar, and to some extent they are. And then you have interdependency. Okay, so let me explain a little more about interdependency, and then we'll talk about reciprocity. And I kind of alluded to it. But this is what we take in when we look at this. Water. Water, of course, connects everything. Okay, so let me finish here with interdependency. That the fires are going on now on this planet down in the forests down in South America. I think the trees produce, I was reading, about 1/3 of the oxygen for this planet. And if that's the case and we're burning it up, we are burning up, or we are getting rid of, just to farm, of a very important generator. So much is the same way as, these astronauts go off, to go off planet. They recycle their air, they scrub it, they say, I'm just using their terminology, so that they can continue to have air. Well, much in the same way, the trees generate oxygen. You and me, and most every single species that's alive needs oxygen, just like we need water. But in terms of the air, what happens is we have this this relationship here that you breathe out what the plants need and the trees need. You may not think so, but as a species and as we cover this planet with ourselves, we breathe out exactly what the plants and more specifically the trees need. And then they generate the oxygen for you. So you have this, this continued relationship, you're connected in this way, but there's also a reciprocal element. If we as human beings deliberately destroy, or in the instance we can't control wildfires or something that's going to mess up that generator, the oxygen content for this planet is going to be reduced. The other thing that American Indians also realize here is that if you do anything that is deleterious to the earth, to Mother Earth, it's our reference, believe me, you do it to yourself. In one of my classes that I was teaching, a couple of years ago, I was telling my students that, and I said, so, I said, well, okay, let me ask you to do this. If you do something that's harmful, not only to yourself, but to everything else around you, and pretty soon you have the harmful effects, you begin to feel it. And I said, so why don't you just take either a fist or an open hand and slap yourself real hard, because that's the effect. And one of them said, after you, Wynema. So it's like, oh, okay, you're right. I won't ask you to do that. But my point, I felt, was made in that we may not see it right away. And one of the colleagues that I speak to, and we exchange lots of emails, I don't know if you know who he is, but his name is George Tinker. And he's a theologian and a scholar. I mean, he's from the Osage tribe, is very, very spiritual. He's also an ordained minister in the Lutheran tradition. But he's not just a Christian, he's also a very American Indian traditionalist, as I am. And so, but he doesn't, work within his religion anymore, only in that he tries to educate the people in his religion about the thinking of American Indians and this worldview, and how, in terms of the spirituality of everything, there's just no way you can really escape, spirituality. And yet, in contrast, the Western world, tends to separate everything. And so we don't have any connection, or we don't come together unless we actually focus on it. And yet, I think it's really deep seated, and it's really deep down inside every human being that they do know this. But the way we develop our societies and the way we think about ourselves, is kind of what emerges. And American Indians as well. I mean, my students, are very Western minded when they come to my classes. And when they leave, of course, they realize that they have access now, in terms of not only how they live, but what they do, to both worlds. Oh, yeah, this is how they think. Oh, and then us Indians, we would do things like this, or we can, oh, I see. So hopefully I'm adding to them, and that's always my intent. So a couple of years ago, let's get to water now. Water, again, is life. It's a slogan for the what was called the No DAPL resistance, when the Dakota pipeline, Dakota Access Pipeline, was going to go under the reservation lands of the Standing Rock Dakota people. The interesting thing about this, and people tend to forget, that was a reroute by Dakota Access Pipeline. The initial route was through white private ownership, owned by white ownership. And they protested and they put up a fuss. And then it was rerouted. And when it was rerouted, it cut directly through the Standing Rock, or underneath the Standing Rock lands. Not only that, but Standing Rock, like all these other tribes that we go up on the Missouri River, it was going to go, or it was going to leach into the Missouri River. And they immediately put up the same fuss and said, you know what, find another way. But it fell on deaf ears because, when you have the focus to empower and enrich a few people, then everything else sort of seems to fall by the wayside. All the other considerations sort of fall by the wayside. However, the tribes responded. Everybody came out to support each other. In fact, one of my students was actually up there from the beginning to the end, and so he said he only went for one of the initial weekends, and he said there were a few little camps up there for that. It was called No Dapple, and he said, but within the next 2 to 3 weeks, those camps grew huge, so huge that they had to establish some sense of order. And he said, and I just went out to chop wood and to lend my support. I just went up to maybe help donate food, gather food. There were charitable organizations, he said, that did come forward. He said, so it wasn't all just, there were people, he said, who did help on the outside. And he said a lot of them, they were like, well, don't tell anybody, but I don't want to lose my business because I'm giving you all, some fresh fruit. And so, it was kind of this kind of really quiet support, because I guess if they came out and said, I'm really going to donate here, help these people, to protest this movement. So what was the core? What was the argument? The argument was that water is not only sacred, but that water quite literally is life. You cannot do without water. You might go a few days. I don't know if any of you are familiar with, or if you even watch, but from time to time I watch this, I can't remember the name of it, but just to relax, I've caught this Naked and Afraid. And one of the things that I see over and over again is not only this need for protein at its very basic level, but water. And they go a few days, but that becomes the first concern. Where can I find water? But if you think about water, it is such a mysterious, think about it, it's a very mysterious element. First of all, if you look, at least insofar as American Indians think, it also comes from the sky. The sky is associated with the world of the invisible. And not only that, but this is where, mysterious things happen. And rain falls to the earth. And when it falls, it is pure. And in that sense, it also is not only just mysterious, it becomes and is considered very, very sacred. Snow takes on the same elements. Hail, because essentially it is water. But water can exist not only as wet water that you and I drink, or that you and I, take our showers with, etc., but it can change. And if it evaporates, and under certain circumstances, it comes back as water. So we often call that steam, but it can freeze and become very, very hard, like ice. And then, of course, it can fall like ice from the sky. So when you consider and look at water in this way, I can totally understand how American Indians would view water as being sacred, particularly as it is pure. It has nothing in it other than life-sustaining properties. We need that water. Scientifically, when we began to break this down, if you look at the Earth, 3/4 of this planet is blue. Blue meaning that's water. You, by the same token, are, what do they say, 75, 78% water. And so again, because of this, underscores my point in that you are connected. You are related. Now, water, like anything else, is impersonal. It can be your friend because it will sustain you. It brings forth new life through birth. Mammals have gushing water, the water breaks, right? And water then is gushing through us. However, without water, nothing can move. And we know that. I mean, in sciences, NASA, they're looking at Mars, they're looking at Moon. I even heard one of my students said, Wynema, I saw on the news that go to it. You can find it. It's on your phone, but go there. But they're talking about that scientists may have found water on the moon. And I said, oh, well, water? How? Well, probably ice. They mean ice. I said, okay, so that's water, yeah. And I said, why would that surprise you? I was like, well, they're always saying that, those planets, that they don't have any water. And they said, and Mars, they said, is dry. And I said, well, but there was evidence of water there maybe before, and maybe there still is. So if you look at the universe, I mean, our universe, the evidence of either water having been there or water still being there in some or one of its forms, then, underscores that water is everywhere. But I started to say that, so it is your friend because it's life. However, in terms of its personalness, if you stay in it too long, if you go underneath it too long, and you don't have oxygen the way we breathe it, not like the fishes, you will die. And in that sense, that's the consequences of your particular action or, lack of care, which of course American Indians also caution against, be careful. In fact, you are careful with everything. And I don't mean like, being gingerly about things like this, but rather how you live your life, how you relate to these sacred substances like water. How do you appreciate it? In fact, many tribes use water as an element of blessings. Now, it's no surprise to you either, because some of the Christian religions use water as well. And then they bless it in some manner and say some prayers over it, I guess, and then they sprinkle it on everybody, and everybody wants to get sprinkled by that water, and then they feel like they too are blessed. So there, again, is this connection. So this is why I say it's not like this is totally foreign or is outside of any human being on this planet, any human being's experience. It's just that you don't recognize it or you don't bring it forth in the manner that American Indians do, and give it the respect and the reverence that it's due. So water then is a very mysterious element. Well, we believe that the whole world is a mystery. And I have heard even some of my own tribal elders, men primarily, and sometimes the women, talking about various things and how mysterious. And they don't say it in a superstitious way or in an ignorant way, but a very profound philosophical discussion about these elements, and water happens to be one of them. I grew up with the caveat of don't waste water. And it's not because water isn't plentiful here. We have plenty of rain. You can go on this reservation for the most part, particularly by the Missouri River, you can go 3 feet and you're going to hit water because you're at the water table. So it isn't as though those were scarce, like it would be for the Southwestern tribes who also respect the springs, consider them sacred, because water becomes paramount in their environment. And so there's respect and this sense of connectedness and relatedness to water then is at the forefront. But even with its plentifulness, my parents were always cautioning, and my older aunts and uncles, my grandparents. I didn't know my grandmother; she died before I was born, and I knew my grandfather only till I was 9, when he passed at a great old age. But they would be saying, don't waste water. If you're going to take water, then drink it. And then if you don't want it, then there's a plant or there's something there, share. And so it wasn't you just take water and just toss it, or just toss it back in the sink. So, this sense of respect is always at the forefront. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do recreation in water, because again, water is fun. It's how you approach with care using water and companioning with it, which of course is what we teach our children when they join swimming teams and aqua acrobatics, those kinds of things. There's nothing wrong with that, because it's an element that, again, because it's impersonal, that you can have this sort of activity with it. But always at the bottom of this lies this strong element of respect. Respect this element. So for American Indians, I've been at many dinners. We have them, and for one reason or another, somebody's birthday or some gathering or a memorial. And sometimes if the person who is essentially in charge does not have access to one of the 4 other sacred substances that we use to pray with, cedar, sage, sweetgrass, and tobacco, if there's none of those present, then he will take a glass of water and pray with it. And then we'll bless it, through his prayers. And then, because we're very communal, he'll pass it around. And everybody takes a tiny little sip. I've been to so many of these, and everybody shares the same cup, and no one has ever gotten ill. Well, and I brought this up once to one of my uncles, and I said, no one ever gets sick when we do this. And you really think this is safe? I was taking the very Western way of looking at, sharing germs, and oh my goodness. And he said, well, you can think that way, niece, if you want to. He said, but let me tell you something. That is a sacred substance in and of itself, but now it is holy. You drink from that, nothing is going to happen to you. Don't even worry about it. So again, it's how you consider it, it's how you view it. And American Indians, in terms of their relationship with water, then it starts off as very sacred. So this resistance, it was resistance, and he said this is my student said, this was a resistance to further encroachment of colonialism. I said, okay, can you explain what you mean? And he said, well, in terms of the Western movement and manifest destiny and everything that we're learning in, your other class here, he said that there's a lot of people up there. He said, it wasn't just all Indians. We had support from a lot of white people. He said, even a lot of some of the celebrities came. He said, of course, they don't stay. He said, I think they do it just for, more calling attention to themselves rather than the issues. So these younger people are very skeptical of looking at things like this. But he said, overall, he said, they could see what we were seeing. They could understand and they could relate to what we were saying, that water is life. Without it, and if that oil gets into the water table, and he told me, like I didn't know, but I do know. He said, we're over the Ogallala Aquifer, Wynema. He said, do you know about that? And I said, yes, I do. And he said, well, if that gets poisoned, then what are you going to do? What are you going to drink? He said, you know what? I heard about one of those states back east. You turn on the water, and if you put a match there, it would flame up. And that there's whole lakes back there. If you throw a match on it, it's going to burn. I said, yes, that is here. I don't know if it's still that way, but at the time, yes. And he said, and that's because these big industries, he said, I'm not against big business. He said, I have to depend on, I go to work for one of them up here at Tyson. He said, I'm not against them. He said, this is how I'm going to earn my money. I don't see myself staying here all the time because I'm going to get my college degree and I'm going to do what I want in terms of where my education takes me. But I'm still going to be aware and I'm still going to know. And I said, good for you. Wonderful. He said, but that Ogallala aquifer, Wynema, he said, if we continue to deplete it at the rate we are, now I'm going to ask you again, Wynema, this is one of my students lecturing me. He says, now what are you going to do if you don't have water? He said, so it isn't like water is life, but water is sacred. You have to treat it. He said, there has to be some reciprocity here. And of course, talk about reciprocity. In terms of reciprocity, I'm going to sort of back off. This doesn't sound like I'm talking much about water at this moment. But the styles of planting for American Indians was, I'll use this term, scattered. There was none of the monocropping that was brought by the Western way of planting and thinking. But rather it was, you just soften the earth, and the three sisters that were known for corn, beans, and squash were scattered. The first to be scattered, of course, was corn, but they would go in there and they would pat the earth over the corn, and they'd build a little mound. But there was no like making decent or these very neat and orderly rows. They would just, wherever the earth was soft, put in the seeds for the corn, plant up a little mound, and put a little depression. And after the corn began to germinate and began to grow, it would get to a certain height. And then after that, they go back to those corn mounds, and then they would soften the earth again around this corn plant. And then they would plant beans and just scatter it around and cover it up a little bit and put in, water it quite well, because you need water, right? And this is what those little depressions did. And then the last thing to be planted was squash. Now, you all know, if you're gardeners, squash has a lot of leaves on it. And so when you look at the relationship here and the connectedness here, the corn is going to grow straight up. And then the beans are going to crawl, they're going to twine, and they're going to go up this corn stalk. So as the corn grows, the bean vines go with the corn stalk. What keeps that ground moist? It's the squash, because the squash are going to crawl along on the ground, they're going to seek out, and because their leaves are very leafy, the moisture that is in the ground, the water, is conserved so that the corn and the beans and the squash can all rely and sustain themselves on, so that you and I can then harvest corn, beans, and squash. So water then is protected by the plants. So you have not only connectedness here, you have relatedness here, and you have interdependency here. So built into this whole little scenario is also reciprocity. Corn takes out and depletes certain nutrients from the soil. Hence, you've got these big, huge farms like ConAgra and Mid-America. They come back and then they make sure that they put these chemicals back in. On my reservation, we still have allotment lands, and so they get leased out for farming to various farmers in and around the reservation, as well as to these big corporations. But they have to sign a planting plan that they will not plant. In other words, there has to be a rotation. So one year they can plant corn, and then the next year they have to plant beans. Well, so what do beans do in addition to the chemicals that are reintroduced? But the beans then will then replenish what the corn takes out. But for the American Indian planting, you grow them all together. You don't disturb the eco balance of the soil that the water nurtures and grows. So again, when you look at where water is, the concern for my one student, and I'm not laughing at him, but it just amazed me that he, was so up on his discussion about, the sacredness of water and the fact that you cannot squander it. What will happen, if this does? And so when you have these elements, or at least the principles of life here, it isn't just you as a human being, but how you relate to the plant, how you relate to not only the plants, but even the animal world. And you don't deplete to the point where you can't recover. So the Ogallala Aquifer, though, that is what you have to protect. This is what every human being, at least on this North American continent, there's another aquifer. I can't remember which direction it is. It's much smaller. You don't hear too much about it, but I sure hope it's not depleted. It's not as big as the Ogallala. But the replenishment of that has, of course, within these last 10 years, been much less than it has been because of planetary changes. And it's been drier than for a long time. So the purification of the water going back through the soil to replenish the Ogallala Aquifer is much slower than the usage. So, I'm going to ask you as well. I'm going to say to you, when you don't have water, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? In fact, just to make the point, I've got my water here and I'm getting dry. Oh, thank you. So this is, that's just for show. I just did that just to make the point. There is a connection here that I share. Water is life. I'm not going to squander it. I don't. The greatest thing that I really like in terms of Western development, making life easier, is the Keurig coffee pot. Because, well, Keurigs, and then there's some other out there, I can't remember some of the other names, but my son and daughter-in-law bought me a Keurig because before I had a Mr. Coffee, and I'd make this pot. And I would always throw away, by the end of the day, I'd probably throw away about, 1 or 2 inches. And I suddenly thought, so then I tried to make less, but then I found myself, I'd still leave a little bit at the bottom. Well, anyway, I was sort of chastising myself in front of my son and daughter-in-law, and they said, oh, really? Well, maybe, you should learn how to brew just very little so that when you pour it, it's all gone and you don't waste it. Because that's what I was doing with that water. That's how the coffee. So at Christmas time, they bought me last year a brand new Keurig, and it is so convenient because it brews one pot at a time, and I don't waste it. So, so I really do like my Keurig and my coffee. So I don't, again, this is how I was raised. Don't waste water any more than you waste food. And of course, I'm from the generation, I got hand-me-down clothes and then I handed mine down to others, but, it's just that I think they were right, that you don't waste anything. when resources become difficult to obtain, then the premium and then the value and the recognition of them goes up. You know, I should have brought maybe the plastic bottle to make the point. Never ever did I think that I would pay for water, and yet I do. And because it's supposed to be pure. It's not supposed to have this in it. It's not supposed to have that in it. So what does that say? What's the message here? The water that we obviously all are drinking is not that pure. So you have companies who are going to take advantage of that. Whether or not it's always true, it's probably, you know, due to you know, a gimmick or a way of, you know, it's marketing for one thing. But nevertheless, you know, looking at my reservation and looking at where people would live and where they were purported to have put their little, there were 3 different villages here, but people didn't always live within those little villages. They would scatter out. It was always near water. And there's one particular stream, you know, that I like to walk along and I like to follow, because that stream bisected one of the more famous villages called the Make-Believe White Man's Village, because that particular tribal leader said, you know what, there's no more buffalo hunts. We can't live that way. We're going to have to learn the white man's way. We're going to have to learn how to educate our children. We're going to have to, you know, adopt some of these ways just to survive. But his village was bisected by a very firm stream about this wide. And in the springtime, I like to walk along because you can see where it goes much easier than, for sure, not the winter time. And during the fall, there's just too much overgrowth. So in the springtime, I love to go, and I imagine there's no evidence of that village whatsoever, but we do know where it is. And of course, the other 2 villages have 2 other streams that are south of this particular one, like 1, 2, and 3 on the reservation. And so they too are by these really nice little streams. There's one stream south that's quite meandering and quite wide, and looks like it disappears and dries up. It doesn't, because if you keep going along, suddenly it disappears again. So it kind of went underground, but it's by a stream. So this tells you then that even from ancient times and even more recent history, 1800s, that people understood the importance and the necessity of water, and to not squander it as a resource. And it's there for you to use. It's there for you to exist. It's part of your existence. It's part of how we on this planet live. All creation needs water. And so it's no wonder to me then that American Indians, in terms of our more holistic worldview of being related to absolutely entire creation, would begin to consider that it was sacred. Okay, so it looks like I'm pretty much kind of over my time. I talked a little bit longer than I perhaps should have, but I am open for any questions or if you need clarification or comments, I'm here. So thank you very much for your kind attention. And I hope, I was able to, just add some food for thought for you as we live through these very, very uncertain and unprecedented times. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, this is an opportunity for you to open up your microphones and ask a question, or you could send questions to the hosts in chat, and we'll share those with Wynema. So, and if you don't have any, I have a couple I've saved here to get started.
Okay.
All right, let me send one out to you then. So I'm pleased that you brought up the aquifer. Because it's a big concern for many people. And when I took a geography class, it was really scary to me. I didn't realize how large it is. I always knew it was in Nebraska, but what I learned was it goes into Texas, etc. Can you share with us any, I learned that there's definite evidence that, well, they talked about Texas mostly actually, and how they're in more damage than we are, but we should learn from it. So can you speak to that a little?
Yeah, it has been measured, and I did talk to one of the biology professors here, and she did say that yeah, they sort of keep track of the Ogallala because again, you know, it affects us. And she said that the last research that they had done, that it had been in terms of, and she explained like there's what is it, cubic feet of water, and she even told me the actual size of what's there, and I mean, and it's huge. However, in terms of the surface use, that whole Ogallala has gone down between 3 to 3.5 inches, and it doesn't recover. She said the most it goes is perhaps another 1/4 to 1/2 an inch. She said, but when you look at the whole surface, and that is a lot of water, yes, but in terms of its usage and its depletion, the rate of depletion is far greater than the rate of restoration. So she said, we are using water from the Ogallala at an unprecedented rate. And she said, and when she sees, and I've sort of been the same way, when I see sometimes these I think they're the irrigation ditches, they're probably flushing something out. But when I'm driving along and I see this irrigation and you just see this water gushing out, and I'm like, oh, shouldn't that be going on your plants? Shouldn't that be going towards the corn? I mean, if you need it, but it really actually, you know, it pains me. It really hurts me to see the squandering of that, knowing that, you know, the Ogallala, which is pure water, you know, isn't being replaced as probably as quickly as that particular little pipe is spewing forth whatever it's spewing forth. So yeah. So yeah, the rate is 3.5 inches, and it can't recover, at least at the rate we are anymore. They can't quite get up to even 1/2 an inch before it is depleted again. So we're in big trouble as long as we continue to allow that to, you know, not be restored in some manner, probably by better discipline on our part. California, I've heard, was so dry that if when you went to a restaurant, they didn't bring you water. You know, restaurants just bring you. Well, of course, now it's more difficult because of the pandemic. But they wouldn't bring you water. You'd have to ask for it if you wanted it. So, yeah. So, you know, I mean, there's a realization, you know, that water shouldn't be squandered. But I think we as human beings, that we're adaptable. I do believe that once we take it seriously, that water is life. Maybe not, you know, if no one wants to attach the fact that it's sacred, you know, but I think they should. But water is definitely life. And without it, you know, maybe we'll be another Mars. Who knows?
We have a question from Gabrielle. Is there any indigenous story of a figure like Jesus who represents living waters?
Not for in the traditional worldview of American Indians. They don't have a religion. And by that, I mean like Christianity or any of the world religions that are recognized and talked about. American Indians are spiritualists, or not spiritualists, but they lived a spiritual way of life and recognized the creator, with God, and related directly to God and the powers that exist on this planet. Thunder, lightning, water. These are powers that are living, but no, there's no connection in that regard. Christianity didn't, you know, come to this continent until it arrived with the Europeans.
And then she extended that to any legendary leader affiliated with water.
Not to to my knowledge, in that regard to affiliated with water, no.
Thank you very much. I have a message I want to share with everybody. I need to do some tech support and get the name of this event in our online evaluation. So if you could give us until tomorrow to complete your online evaluation, I apologize. That one's on me. Let's see. I have another question.
Cynthia Cusack.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so excited. First of all, the information was amazing. I had my human service class come here, and I was honestly wondering how it would tie in to human services. I could not be more delighted. It's just such good information on many different levels. And I don't actually have a question, but I do, well, I kind of do. Do you ever work like in the area of human services, tying the two cultures together?
I guess only if asked. If, if it's explained to me how, the focus or what the focus is, then, and if I don't have the expertise, then I do know others that do. And so it's just kind of a sort of if asked. And, I mean, like Barbara asked me, can you talk about water? And I said, of course I can. I mean, I'm talking about a lot of things. Yeah, I mean, so no, if I haven't been asked, let me put it that way necessarily. And again, if I have the expertise, then of course I'm most happy to do so. But if I don't, then I can refer others who probably could. So
I so appreciate your style too. It's you're just very kind and easy to listen to. So I think that it might, maybe in the future we'll reach out or something. But I really thank you. I'm just so happy.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, you bet.
We have a question from Jane Howard. Are you familiar with the research by Masaru Emoto with water? Study the impact of prayers and other factors on water, different types of music, words, etc., and their impact on the cellular structure of water. Just from water is one book.
Yes, absolutely. And this is why, I think for American Indians, we often say that keep the negativity to a minimum. Always be positive, be happy, because that's what the Creator wants you to do, is be happy. I mean, give you life, give you everything that's around you, and it's all sacred and holy. Just be happy with your existence. But yes, I'm very familiar with how with negativity and horrible thoughts and words that come out, because words are very powerful. I mean, words are powerful. And once they're said, you can never call them back, and they reverberate out to the universe. So, and you're going to affect everything in existence. So water is one of them, but it will show the results of that. So, my students and I have discussed this, and I think we read up on some article on this as well. They could probably do a video on it if they wanted to. And I think there was some such on the news or something at one point. But yes, we are very familiar. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give one last question. Oh, did somebody want to say something? Okay. One question that we have in the chat. What can we do when it comes to the pipeline and the oil industry? How much damage has already been caused by leaks?
Oh. You don't hear much about it, but there's been a lot of damage. Even before it came to light, there was leakage. There was a rancher in North Dakota that shortly after or during said, even though you're saying that it won't leak, there's already leakage on my property. And he was very, very angry, but you don't hear much about it. And so you had a lot of ranchers who supported the no DAPL pipeline. Unfortunately, I think they were put on a stay for about a year. That is going to be over. And once it is, the pipeline's going to go forward. You know, what we can do as human beings is to continue to sustain. It's like, you know, the recognition of Black Lives Matter movement, where you sustain the movement. You essentially say enough is enough. You know, we're going to draw the line here, and you don't move forward. On the other hand, you have the lure of the convenience of flipping on a switch, you know, blowing your hair dryer, that the oil that we are so dependent upon goes through. However, that oil doesn't belong to us, and it's not going to benefit us as people on this continent, or at least, yeah. And so, you know, it would take a lot more than, you know, the tribes and the groups that did the resistance here, and, you know, continued and sustained information and continued and sustained effort. And, you know, these North Dakota winters, it's so surprising that they lasted for as long as they did, which is 5 months. And they did manage, but they know the fight is not over. It will resume again because the stay was only for a year. And so once that year, it's coming up, and the plans to move forward are still going. They haven't stopped. Plans are still there. So we as human beings, we become involved. You can, you know, I mean, there's all kinds of things I would say that you could probably do in forming, creating awareness and means and methods. And of course, you got to remember, this was a very peaceful, truly peaceful. None of the people who were at the Sacred Stone, it was called Sacred Stone campsite, had any weapons of any sort. None. In fact, the student that was telling when he had gone up there got shot by a so-called rubber bullet. And he said when he got hit with this rubber bullet, he said it actually cracked his rib cage and caused his whole chest to be black and blue for months. And of course there was a water, you know, they use water, you know, much like fire workers do to put out fire, strong water coming out of the hoses. So they were hosing them down. They turned dogs loose on them. I mean, everything was used against them, and yet they remained with no weapons whatsoever, except their eating utensils for a knife. That was it. But they didn't use any of that against the force that was brought up against them. So this can be revived. There has to be a longer, perhaps a better planned means in which to sustain the resistance to that, and saying, you know, Canada, if it's so important to you, then go somewhere else. You know, I mean, go around, do something, but don't endanger another continent's water source. Well, I'm sure they probably use Ogallala as well. I'm not sure. So yeah, so there are things that we can do, but it takes working together. Black, white, red, brown, whatever, checkered. I don't care. We as human beings, we are all connected. We're all related, and we all have a sense of responsibility. And what I think is that we've lost the focus on responsibility because we insist upon our rights. So if we can shift our thinking to being responsible for one another and for this planet, we can make some positive changes for ourselves. Ultimately, that's who it's going to affect. Didn't mean to preach.
Oh, thank you so much, Ms. Morris. We appreciate it. I want to thank the audience for being so attentive.
Yes.
We have run out of time. I would like to give everyone one more reminder. In 1 week, our opportunity and civic responsibility to vote will have passed. This is just one more reminder that your city, county, state, and country need your vote. Every governing level can impact the quality and preservation of our precious water resource.
Yes.
I will leave you with that. And Posey, would you please put up our evaluation sign?
Thank you all. Thank you, everyone. It was my pleasure. Thank you. Yes, thank you,
This is,
Cynthia. Thank you all.
this is that address where I need to get something fixed. So if you can write it down, mccneb.edu/IIEEVAL. Tomorrow, I'm going to attempt to have this program listed. Many apologies. And then final slide, Posey, please. Our next Native American Heritage Month program is tomorrow, and it will be one in our series of storytelling. We will have Elena Eagleshield, who's Papa Lakota, providing storytelling, and that will be from 2 to 3 p.m. And there's a link for the Zoom listed there. If you need more information, you can go to mccneb.edu/native to see all of the programming for this month. And one last huge thanks to Miss Wynema Morris,
You're
who
welcome.
has enlightened us. I agree with Cindy. It's really fun to listen to her because she's just very engaging and makes us all feel warm inside. So thank you, and I will say goodbye to everyone.
Bye-bye.